lots of things to occupy your time nowadays, aren't there? Right? I mean, the internet's changed all of our lives. It's diverted attention from the basics. So in the mix of it all, does Jesus still matter to people?
It does make you wonder. When you look out at the world, you think, I increasingly feel like, well, this is what I do. Mm-hmm. This is what my family does. And if I know when I say that to you, that's gonna be outside your frame of reference, which is fine. Do you know what? I was thinking about this last night. I'm increasingly viewing myself as a minority in America.
It's easy to think that.
Yeah, I think it's true.
Yeah. Probably so. J. Warner Wallace is back with us from Cold Case Christianity. Jim is a Dateline featured cold case detective, senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, adjunct professor at Biola, author of Cold Case Christianity. And Jim, does Jesus still matter?
Well, I think what you just said is really interesting, in that we are in a world, if you think about it, where people see truth claims as highly personal, subjective, and changeable. So you have your truth, Kathy, but I have my truth. And you might have your truth about God, but I have my truth about God, or the lack of God. Right. And that, since if truth is all grounded in personal opinion, then why would you think that your view is any better or worse than my view, unless somehow you think you're a better or worse person than me? And there's the problem, I think, when we're talking about Jesus. When we say, is he valuable, or we say Christianity is true, do we mean, is he valuable for us? Or do we mean it's true for us? Or do we mean this is true whether we like it or not, whether we have a view or not? It's objectively true, the truth that transcends both of us. Now, I do think that Jesus still matters for a couple of reasons. And if the Gospels are true, and this is why I spent so many years before I became a Christian, I spent probably a year just trying to examine whether or not those Gospels were telling me anything true about the resurrection. The resurrection is the piece of evidence that changes everything, because if Jesus rose from the grave, he's in an entirely different category than others in history who even made claims about God. He'd be in a different category. So I needed to know, was this true? And then once I realized it was, look, I've been saying this a lot lately, the gospel fixes every kind of stupid you can think of. And we have a lot of stupid right now in America, in the world.
Sure do.
And it turns out that the gospel actually does address different kinds of stupid that you might be experiencing, whether it's social justice stupid, or it's marriage stupid, or it's your kids' behavior stupid, whatever kind of stupid you think we're facing. It turns out the gospel has something to say about it, and actually describes the world the way it really is, describes our human nature the way it really is, designed in the image of God, capable of great beauty, at the same time duplicit and capable of great evil. This is the nature of all my cold cases, for example. So what I love about Scripture is that it does two things. It is true, it's telling me something true about history, and it still matters in the sense it still applies to me. It's still relevant to me. It's look, I've got a drawer here on my desk, and I found in this drawer, I keep all kinds of manuals. And I found in this drawer a manual for a lawnmower that I have thrown away probably 15 years ago. I mean, it's been sitting in this drawer, this manual
Good
forever.
thing you're keeping that, Jim.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, I mean, now the manual, as I pull it out, it still tells me something true about a lawnmower, but it's no longer necessary to me because it no longer applies to my life. That lawnmower doesn't exist anymore. But the Bible does two things. It's true, and it's still necessary because it describes the world the way it really is. And Jesus, as the key figure in the New Testament, of course, is still important, because it turns out if you are watching this video or listening to this radio show today, you are listening to it on technology that is largely available to you based on the advances of science, which are, for the most part, stand on the shoulders of a scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th century, which was led by Christians, by Christ followers. It turns out the sciences were dominated and are still. Every major scientific discipline was fathered by somebody who was a Christ follower. Did you know that? No. I'm not saying, I mean, there are a few that aren't, but not many. If you like chemistry, modern chemistry, fathered by a Christian. You like modern quantum mechanics, fathered by a Christian. It turns out the Christian worldview allowed great thinkers to see their study of the natural realm as an exploration of God's nature, and that drove them to do things that other groups just didn't do. It's not just that, it's education. The modern university is a product of Christian thinking. As a matter of fact, the top 15 universities in the world today were founded by Christians. Whether they are still Christian or not is another issue. But you can go to those buildings and reconstruct the story of Jesus just from the buildings on those top 15 universities.
Fabulous.
The arts dominated. No one's been etched, sculpted, drawn, or painted more than Jesus of Nazareth. Music. The music comes out of the church, a church that meets every week and sings music in front of a live audience. That's been going on for centuries. And we have been innovators. No one's been sung about more than Jesus of Nazareth. As a matter of fact, I did a research of the top 100 artists in the IMDb database, Rolling Stone magazine, Billboard magazine. All but 2 in the last 100 years had sung something about Jesus. That can't be said of any other historical figure. Nobody's been written about in literature more than Jesus of Nazareth. If you look at the Library of Congress or you do a Google book search, you will find that no one has impacted literature. There are Christ figures in fiction. That's not true of any other historical figure. No one has had an impact on literature, art, music, education, science, and even other world religions like Jesus of Nazareth. He alone has had that kind of impact in the common era, not just in the West, because everything in the West is now transferable by way of video and the internet. It's a global impact. How do we explain that? It turns out if you're an atheist who thinks the things that really matter are literature, art, music, education, and science, well, you can thank Jesus for those, because it turns out it was his followers who founded the very things that you think are still important, that you think still matter. They matter because of Jesus and his followers.
Fabulous. Jim, I love this so much. This is so spot on. But I need to go back because you may be new to some of our audience. Now, your training is as a police officer and a cold case homicide detective. So you're saying that you are an atheist, and nothing is probably is colder than the cold case of looking at Jesus resurrected from the dead. So drill down into that. Obviously, you're doing some deep research here. How did you come to the conclusion that that was right?
Well, and let's face it, I was not raised by Christians, and I wasn't raised around Christians. So I didn't know any Christians who could tell me much about Jesus, except the people I did know were the people I'd taken to jail. A lot of those folks told me they were Christians. And I just thought this whole thing was a joke. But we walked into a church because my wife was interested in seeing what it was all about. And we were together about 18 years before either one of us became Christians. And I just simply bought a Bible to see if Jesus was what the pastor had described in that church service. He said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And I wanted to see if that was true. And as I read through the Gospels, I realized, this is an account. These are 4 accounts where people want me to believe that this sequence of events occurred in that particular order, at that particular time, at that particular location on the globe. So I thought, well, that's very similar to the kind of supplemental reports I get where I have no access to the witnesses or the report writers in cold cases. Let me take a look at those and see if I tested them under the 4 criteria, would they pass the test as reliable eyewitnesses? And they did. And so for me, that's what changed everything. Because once you recognize that, or you come to the conclusion that the Gospels are saying something true about Jesus, the very next move is to see if they're saying something true about you. And that's what changes things. Mm-hmm. That's how the gospel fixes every kind of stupid. Not because it makes a claim just alone about Jesus, but because it makes claims about us, and it calls us to do better. It calls us to trust, to bend our knee, to surrender, to realize that your good works will never save you, but there is a Savior who does. And once you've surrendered to that Savior, the Spirit fills us and things begin to change. And every kind of stupid you can think of, every kind of ship that's been turned can be righted again. And that's what I think we are at a point right now where the one thing that probably we're not allowed to talk about in culture, that'll probably get you thrown off these platforms faster than anything else, happens to be the one thing that could change the culture. Yet we're not allowed to talk about it. It's the one thing that fixes every kind of stupid. We have to be bold, because it turns out that this kind of boldness will change our culture.
But it involves us to surrender. Right? That's the linchpin. If we don't surrender.
Well, yeah, because what you're saying, Jim, is that there is like a line of demarcation. That we, I was thinking about, several of your cases have been featured on Dateline. If you look at the primetime lineup on any, major cable station, it's some kind of police drama or it's some kind of forensic drama or something like that. So people appear to really love that uncovering of fact. fact, right? And, when forensics became a big deal, maybe within the last 20 years, right? Such a huge thing. And people want to see how smart people can recreate something and then find out who's at fault, right? So we very much as a culture value fact up until the point where it indicts us.
Or it's inconvenient.
Right. So
no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So talk about that.
Yeah, but part of it is when I'm looking for jurors on a case, a cold case that's going to go to trial, I'm looking for people who are passionate. Passion is important. That's why if you're going to go on a jury and you're going to sit there and argue passionately why you can't be on the jury, more than likely we're going to keep you on that jury because we like passionate people, even people who try passionately to get off the jury. So we're going to keep you if you're passionate. But we're also looking for people who are humble, people who won't think that they know more than people who are going to bring on the stand to testify, people who won't let their pride get in the way of a decision. That's incredibly important because it turns out that pride is one of those things, probably the thing that keeps us from everything else. When if you look back at your life, at all the mistakes you made, you probably could trace them to the fact that you were pretty prideful or thought you knew something that you didn't even know yet. Well, that's a big issue for all of us. So it turns out the gate that takes us out of our own self-reflective thinking we're all important is the issue of pride. Are you willing to surrender your pride? And that's hard to identify. By the way, wouldn't you want that in a spouse? Do you want a spouse who's so full of themselves, herself or himself, that they won't listen to anything you have to say? Of course not. And so in the end, I think this is the thing. This is why the surrender is such a big deal. Now, a lot of us, I'm not willing to surrender to something I don't think is true, even if it's useful. To me, truth was the highest priority. I often say I'm not a Christian because it works for me. Because honestly, I think most of our listeners right now would say it's not working. Like you were saying, you're starting to feel like you're the one group that you're in the minority. That's going to be happening soon. We're probably still in the majority, at least of people who claim this identity. Whether or not they really are Christians is often another thing. But they would at least probably 55 to 60% of the culture right now would say they are Christians of some nature. But the reality is that's shrinking every year by about a percentage or a percentage and a half. So it won't be long until we are the minority in the culture. And then the question, of course, becomes, do people look at us and say, well, people believe in this Iron Age book, which is the source of all things that are wrong with the world. It's because of you folks that we have misogyny and racism and homophobia and transphobia and everything you can think, every phobia and ism that's evil. It's all because of you believing this Iron Age book. Well, that's why I say it's not. So if you think this is going to work for you in the sense that it's going to do you some great service, you're going to get that job now because you said you're a Christian. You're going to be popular on social media now because you said you're a Christian. Good luck with that. That's not going to happen. But here's the question. We have to make a choice. Do we want to be popular or do we want to be faithful? Because I don't think there's a way. I can't give you a strategy in which to make the teaching of Jesus popular. And he said it wasn't going to be. He said, blessed are those who are insulted and persecuted and falsely accused of all kinds of evil because of me. That he didn't say if, he said, blessed are you when. That means it's coming. And we're going to have to make a decision. Are we going to be faithful to Jesus, even though we're going to take all the insults and all the persecution that comes along with identifying? And I think this is a generation right now. Honestly, folks, I think this is a generation that doesn't really care whether it's true or not. What they care about is, do I want to wear the T-shirt? Do I want to identify with this? When it's just going to bring all kinds of problems for me. I think what's going to happen first is people are going to become quiet about their faith. And at some point, they're just going to deny the faith altogether. So we have to make a decision. Are we willing to be part of a worldview that is not going to be popular? But it has this one advantage. It's true. And I'd much rather be part of a truth claim. I'd much rather put my faith in a kind of an inconvenient truth than a convenient lie.
Yes.
And I think that's really where we are.
It's true, but we need to necessarily act in accordance with the truth, which, of course, you just made reference. I've arrested Christians. We say one thing and act a different way.
Well, and I think this hypocrisy is what young people look at, and they'll say, this is really why I'm out. I'm out because I've known some, and by the way, there's only 3 reasons why anyone rejects a claim. They either reject it because rational objections, emotional objections, or volitional objections. I think probably volitional objections, I don't want it to be true because I like being the God of my own world, is probably the lion's share of objections. But often the objection is not, well, I've examined all the historical facts, and I think you've got a problem with this statement from Josephus. It's not the issue. The issue is, you know what? I know a lot of Christians, and they're a bunch of jerks. If that's what it is to be a Christian, I can't. If I got to vote that way, I hear this a lot from millennials, from Gen Z right now. If I got to vote that way to be a Christian, I can't do it. If I got to vote for that candidate,
Right.
oh my gosh. So what I often will say is, well, I don't vote for, I've never voted for a candidate. I vote for future potential realities that come into existence because of a candidate. Because I'm trying to shape a world that's closest to my Christian worldview and the priorities of the gospel. And sometimes you got to ride an ugly horse to get to that destination. But again, it's not about, the question is one question: is this true? Is Christianity true? I love it, and I get quoted all the time. I didn't say this. C.S. Lewis said this, and it's something I've repeated often enough that people think I say it. It's not me. But if Christianity is not true, it's of no importance. We should walk away. If it is true, it's of critical importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important.
Right.
And that's why I think we have to help our kids to see that if this is true, it's the kind of true that you're going to have to surrender to. The same kind of truth that says, hey, it's true that there's a train coming down these tracks. You shouldn't step on that train track. Well, is that really just my opinion, or is there really a train coming? Because if it's just, my truth, but it's not really true for you, then you can do whatever you want. But if it's true for both of us, we ought to stay off the tracks. And that's why I think we have to help people see it's going to start with us talking about the nature of truth first. And then we can move toward Christian truth.
Fabulous. J. Warner Wallace, Cold Case Christianity. And of course, Jim, you've staked in many ways your career on this. Take a second and talk about Cold Case. I mean, you've reached a lot of people with the truth.
Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to write books that people are accessible. Like you said, Kathy, a lot of us, what we're doing is very similar to what historians do, but no one seems to be interested in historians when they should be, because what we're talking about are historic claims related to God. So what I try to do is take the same principles I use in working at events in the past where I don't have access to the witnesses anymore, those are cold cases, and leverage them toward the gospel. And I've tried to do this in books that really take a detective twist. I wrote the last book I wrote was called Person of Interest. And there I'm really trying to give you a strategy for no body murders where we don't have a body, and said, hey, if we hadn't have any information about Jesus from the Gospels, it turns out we could still solve this case because of his impact on culture. So you're looking at what leads up to a murder and what follows. So I think that approach, by being a detective, will help people to see the truth about the Gospels.
Amen.
Check out several works. I would say Cold Case Christianity, I think, is still, 10 years old?
Almost 10 years
Yeah.
you've been doing these interviews. I'm so glad I'm grateful to you. You were my first interview, and now I can say today you're my last.
How about that? A couple weeks ago when John was on vacation, I was talking to Karen Swallow Pryor, and I coined this term guest friend. People who've been guests for a long time and have become friends. Well, Jim, you were the first one.
Yeah. Very good,
You're
Jim.
the best. I feel the same way. So we can't stop meeting like this.
No, we
Very
can't.
good.
We
But wait,
can't.
find us. Cold Case Christianity's on the web, isn't it?
Yes, coldcasechristianity.com.
Very nice. Jim, always a pleasure. Great to see you. You're doing excellent work. Please keep it up. We need to hear the truth.
Thanks. Bye, Kathy. Thanks, John. Appreciate you both.
Thank you. ColdCaseChristianity.com. Fabulous work. J. Warner Wallace.